on a Sunday.
It hardly seems possible, but it's true. Only 12 more shopping days till Christmas.
My parents had just bought a radio,
which is our amusement back in those days.
Well, here's a helpful hint. Stock up on Jell-O tomorrow. For with Jell-O,
my dad was sitting at the kitchen table.
Race with the old clock.
And it was interrupted.
Instantly, sets quickly and off.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin.
He just looked up and he said,
Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by
the Japs have just bombed Pearl Harbor.
We just couldn't believe it at first.
The newsboys were going down the street yelling, extra, extra, extra.
It's something you'll never forget.
Oh, I mean, that was impossible to believe, but we did. We had to.
The United States Pacific Fleet is attacked by squadrons of Japanese aircraft at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii.
Since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
There was the greatest patriotism, universal patriotism in this country that there ever has been, and far more than there ever will be again, I feel. Everything was turned out for the war effort, as was indicated by all the men being in the service and all the women working in the jobs to replace them. That feeling was blanket wide. It just covered everything and everybody. Nobody was complaining about what they had to do to further the war effort. It was just a complete feeling of absolute support for everything that our troops and everyone did.
In the decades before World War II, Oak Harbor was isolated and remote. This Whidbey Island community in North Puget Sound was unaware of changes that would soon alter its future. A town of shopkeepers, farmers, fishermen, loggers.
Chickens were a main source of revenue in the early days because the ground wasn't good enough for much in the way of crops or dairying. 365 people walking through town. I could say hello to everyone I met, and I wasn't the person that was in town much. Everybody knew everybody. That was, in many ways, a wonderful situation.
We had a ferry that went across over by Cornet Bay over to the Fidel side. And it was a small ferry that didn't hold too many cars.
If you wanted to go off at night, you had to go over and either raise a flag or shine a light or something to get the ferry to come and take you on or off. It provided, at best, a slow and inconvenient way of getting off the island.
So when you went somewhere for an evening, you came back same evening.
We pretty much stayed home, and it was a real treat when we did get to go.
As in most small communities, people sought out entertainment, activities, friends.
Our church was primarily our lifestyle. In those days, we had church services both morning and the afternoon.
There were people in town that didn't approve of movies or dancing or anything else that you could have a good time with. So it was quite a battle to get people to come to the movies.
In 1929, the stock market crash on Wall Street brought a catastrophic economic depression to the nation. Oak Harbor, though largely self-sufficient, was not immune.
Brother, it was a depression. Jobs were scarce, low pay.
I just thought everybody was living like we were. In fact, they were, because we were all very poor, but we never lacked for anything.
Women school teachers had to leave their job and go home and take care of the family. There wasn't enough money to pay them. A nickel was big money. A candy bar was a nickel. An ice cream cone was a nickel, but I tell you, it was hard to come by, even that nickel.
But in the middle of the Depression, 1935, a spectacular bridge across Deception Pass began the shift in Oak Harbor's destiny.
And it just made such a difference. We weren't the little stuffed away village that we had been, you know. It had to rely upon a little ferry to take your car across Deception Pass, or over to Camino Island. They had another ferry.
It was a scary thing because it was such a high thing that these people were building. And I admired these men that were willing to go out there and work on something that high up above the water.
It meant being able to get to the mainland without waiting for an hour or maybe 2 hours sometimes for a ferry. It just opened the island up.
There must have been people who were there ahead of time, flying over, driving through, making tentative plans to put this base there.
Well, then when Pearl Harbor hit, the President of the United States, President Roosevelt, said we need to patrol our coast.
But the Navy needed a seaplane base. They needed a place to train people in PBYs.
I would think they would have taken aerial views, which would show the neck of land and where they could have the seaplanes pulled up and serviced.
Admiral Perry would fly about the Methow Valley as well as up this area. He loved to go hunting. And seeing the twin harbors here at Oak Harbor, he thought that'd be an ideal place for a seaplane base.
They had over 300 days of flying weather a year, so it was a good spot to train. The big question you get when you say PBY, the first question you get, what is a PBY? Modern people don't know.
Patrol Bomber Y, a reference to the manufacturer.
They were used for almost anything that you could imagine. They used it as a dive bomber, they used it as a torpedo bomber, things that it weren't designed for, but they had nothing else. And the seaplane base was built for the PBY. That happened to be Oak Harbor.
When the Navy came in, it was a hard time. We needed them. We welcomed them, and we were mad at them.
We were told, we will appraise your land and give you what the appraisal amounts to.
They took over Clover Valley, sent all the dairy farmers in Clover Valley to wherever they could find another place to farm. My friends left and were gone. It was a necessary evil. We had to have them, but gee, do they have to come in here and disrupt our community?
Everybody was really shocked when they heard that Mailer's had sold that beautiful land out there. Acres of woods, and the farmer that had sold it, they got $52,000. Couldn't hardly buy a doghouse for that now.
Right where you enter the base, that's where our farm was. Our house. It was a farm in which my dad and my uncle were able to be very successful dairymen. They raised most of their own crops because it was good farmland, especially the marsh area where that was the little isthmus that connected Mailer's Point to the entrance to the base where our house stood. 340 acres covers a lot of land. Much of it was view property, which would be worth millions today. but that didn't count in those days. Urkus Hill is where the Victory homes were built. And then Urkus Barn, the big red barn, which was a landmark. In fact, I think many of the people in Oak Harbor have a picture of the town of Oak Harbor, which was taken from the top of our barn.
And then out in Alt Field, they bought all the farms along Alt Field. And at San Defuca, as far as Hasty Lake.
Pearl Harbor was December 7, 1941. On March 13, a Friday, 1942, we were out lock, stock, and barrel.
Everything was in turmoil. We were at war. And we just seemed to go along with it.
The lowland farming area of Clover Valley became Alt Field, while Mailer's Point would become one of the world's elite seaplane bases, home to the PBY.
Churches began to go up all over. I guess they figured if the Navy was moving in, they were going to need some prayer.
Everything that was livable, even halfway livable, was improved so that the young families could come in here and live.
Well, it just simply grew like topsy.
Business, beehive of activity, getting things built and constructed. So much to do and so little time to do it. In a time when we were entirely supportive of every effort that could be made to win that war in the South Pacific, which was going so badly.
It just meant everything. It meant jobs. People, we'd gone through the Depression, and it was a dreadful time, 10 years.
To answer falsification.
Feeding this growth was the President's demand for a fleet of PBY aircraft to support our war effort.
We had a few aircraft carriers out there, but here was a versatile plane, and so they put 50 caliber machine guns on it, torpedoes on it, bombs on it. They did everything with it.
One of the saving features of the PBY is the fact that it moves so slowly. They could loiter for hours. I mean, you could fly that airplane for 16 or 20 hours on a load of fuel. And they'd go out and just circle an area and wait for an opening and then go into it. You spent hours and hours looking for a periscope that most of the time you didn't see. Didn't have to worry about runways. Yeah, you could take off with a fully loaded airplane off of the water because you have miles of water. That was the limiting factor in most big bombers, was the length of the runways. They would get a report that a fighter plane was down somewhere off an island, and the PBY would go out in the water and pick him up. Lots of time under hostile fire from the Japanese on the shore or from Japanese airplanes patrolling the area.
Daily, the PBYs would take off in Crescent Harbor, go around Mailer's Point and over Oak Harbor and down to Crescent Harbor again. There was a constant roaring when we were talking. One came over, you just stopped talking and waited for them to get across and then continue.
It was very, very loud. There was no insulation in the airplane at all. The inside of the airplane looked like just the hull of a regular boat. There was a catwalk at the bottom that you walked fore and aft on, probably 12 to 14 inches wide. And other than that, you're looking down at the aluminum underneath. You had to have muscle because nothing was hydraulic on that airplane except the autopilot. But we were like a family in the airplane. We lived together. We stayed in the same Quonset. We were very, very close. Everybody that flew the PBY loved them. Not comfortable to fly in, however. You're sitting between two engines, 1,200 horsepower. They're very close to the fuselage. pilots have actually reached back with their hand out the window and got hit with the propeller.
Most of the air crews in training were deployed to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. These pilots and their planes were critical in resisting Japanese advances on Alaska from 1942 to 1944.
Meanwhile, we were enjoying the dogfights that were going on in the air. We thanked them for that part that they were taking in the war, and we hooped and hollered for them every time they shot down another airplane. I remember I had a field down in front that was green, and I took the field cultivator down there and I made a Morse code for V, for victory. I talked to some of the pilots that had seen that as they flew over the place. That was kind of the atmosphere that pervaded the island in those days, I think. Go get 'em.
As this community embraced its important role in the war effort, security became paramount.
The bridge was patrolled day and night. And for several miles before you arrived at the bridge, on that main road, on either end of the bridge, all the cars had to have only parking lighting. And so we just kind of crawled along for maybe 10 miles. Because that was almost an eerie feeling, driving over the bridge with just parking lights and having someone there with a gun.
Being on the west coast was a precarious position to be when our enemy was to the west. On our farm, they built an observation tower, 30 feet high, and that tower was manned for the first 3 or 4 years anyway, continually, day and night.
Community members took turns standing in that tower. When you heard of a plane, you called alt field.
We were ordered that we had to make sure that our lights didn't show out from the windows. We had to have our blinds drawn. In fact, they had some special blackout shades that Oak Harbor Furniture was selling, and it was black on the outside so that it really kept the light inside the house.
Many of the community people volunteered to patrol the beaches, particularly West Beach. One would go a mile this way, the other that way, and they also carried guns.
At the time when things were really red hot, we were flying every day. As a matter of fact, at one time we did about 3 consecutive patrols in a 48-hour period. PBYs that we had could stay up about 16 to 20 hours. We actually had 2 crews flying it, or a double crews at each position. We would have patrols out to about 400 nautical miles out, fly a cross leg, and then return. PBY is kind of a low-flying airplane, so the paint scheme, as you can see, was kind of blue to sort of meld in with the ocean if you're looking at a PBY from up above. If you're below a PBY, then it's supposed to be looking like clouds, so it'd have this very light gray under there, so it kind of looked like a cloud from underneath.
The big thing was flying at night. They painted black, and at night, even with spotlights on them, they were hard to find in the dark. That's what really made the Black Cat Squadron in the South Pacific. They would fly at night and just kill the Japanese supporting craft on the water. Just use them as dive bombers and torpedo bombers.
That was most of our flying, was looking for enemy fleets and looking for enemy submarines. In those cases, we carried 4 depth charges with, I believe they're 325 pounds apiece, and they were dropped usually 2 at a time.
A lot of these airplanes got shot down and got shot up. As you see, there's really not much defense. 50 caliber on each side, 30 in the nose, and a 30 out the tail.
We developed a very close relationship to the crew. We always flew with the same crew, and the crew was very loyal to the pilot.
Those flight crews would find entertainment and recreation at the local USO Club.
They just became part of the community because most of them were from small towns.
When the Navy came in, I'm sure that many mothers were very much more careful about when and where their daughters were because of this influx of eager young men and young country girls.
USO gave them something to do, and they usually had hostesses there that would come in and serve. They'd have cookies and coffee and lunch probably, and they'd also have dances.
Oh my. They had dances downtown, they had dances out on the base. They took part in parades and anything that was going on.
Throughout the war years, Oak Harbor, with its fleet of PBY and other Navy aircraft, labored on, contributing mightily to final victory in 1945.
All I can say is that they sunk thousands of tons of shipping and saved thousands of lives. In fact, this country owes quite a bit to that PBY for what it did during the war, especially on the oceans all over the world.
Very proud history. I was in the last squadron to be here, and I think it was May or June of '48, we decommissioned VPAM-1, which was the last one here. There were still some PBYs out in Kaneohe, but that was pretty much the death knell of the PBY in the inventory.
There were no official decommissioning ceremonies for this proud aircraft. By the late 1940s, seaplanes were becoming outdated in our national arsenal. But general operations at the Oak Harbor Seaplane Base lingered on for nearly 20 more years.
When we came back from Vietnam in 1966, that was the end of the seaplane operation.
The Navy briefly flirted with the possibility of converting the seaplane base to a deep water port. The Salisbury Sound soon called Oak Harbor its home port.
Here was a Navy ship, deep draft, that was tied up at the seaplane base at the pier down there. She came here in '64. Okay, I came aboard '65, but there was a great deal of excitement in this community that they had a ship. I mean, it was really great.
But peacetime budget reductions and a de-emphasis on a large naval fleet for our national defense brought an untimely end to hopes for the port. Still, Oak Harbor's now proud military demeanor would remain unchallenged during the wars of Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War, and into the new century.
You see that so constant and it's always been here. Returning squadrons, you see the marquees welcoming them home and like that you just forget that it's there. But it's there here, it's not there somewhere else. And of course with 9/11 and what happened there, and then units that are coming back from having served over in some dangerous areas, the town just welcomes them. Never seen so many American flags flying as you do here in Oak Harbor.
Today, Oak Harbor's burgeoning growth is still linked to its bond with the Navy. Alt Field, formerly Clover Valley Cropland and the Rickson Farm. The Seaplane Base, Crescent Harbor, and the Victory Homes area, formerly the Urquhart Farm. Naval Housing, formerly the Mailer Farm. The names of these Oak Harbor farmers and residents share a proud legacy with the many dedicated Navy men and women who came to Oak Harbor in defense of their nation.
We want to preserve this history. You can't let this history go. And if we do, it's lost. And you ask people a day, they talk about seaplanes. As a chaplain, I remember a few years ago I was out at the base and talked with the new chaplains in the Navy. And they said, I mentioned to them I had duty here. And they said, oh, great, were you here? You must have been here at the chapel. And I said, no, I was aboard ship. Aboard ship. Where was that? And I said, well, the seaplane tender was tied up down here at Seaplane Base. And I said, we flew seaplanes. And they looked at me and they said, seaplanes? It didn't register. So we want this to register. In other words, we want this to be recorded.